Picture a woman standing in a doorway. She's blocking the light that comes from the street, and the street isn't giving much to begin with. Fog, mostly, and the faint orange smear of a gas lamp somewhere behind her that's doing its level best against the November dark. She's got a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hands resting against the doorframe are red and cracked at the knuckles, split open in a few places that haven't quite healed. She looks 60. She's 40. And I need you to hold that fact in your head for a second, because everything that follows depends on it. 40. In 2026, 40 is young. 40 is a woman who runs half marathons and has a skincare routine. 40 is someone's glamorous aunt who drinks wine and looks annoyingly good in photographs. 40 is, by any modern measure, the middle of your life at worst, and practically the beginning of the interesting part at best. In 1887, in the East End of London, for a woman who has spent 24 years doing what this woman has done, 40 is ancient. 40 is borrowed time. 40 is the age where other women in your court stop being surprised when they hear you've got a cough that won't quit, and start making quiet preparations instead. Her name is Margaret. Margaret Ellen Pierce, née Hackett. She was born in 1847 in a room not entirely different from the one she lives in now, which tells you something about the brutal efficiency of Victorian poverty. You could spend your entire existence within 4 streets of where you started, working every day of your adult life, and end up with almost exactly what you began with, which is nearly nothing. She's had 6 children. 3 survived to adulthood. One of those 3 matters to this story in a way that won't be clear until later, and I'll ask you to be patient about that. She's a charwoman, which means she cleans other people's houses for money, which means she gets up before 5 in the morning to walk 40 minutes across London so that a family she will never eat dinner with can wake up to floors that someone else has scrubbed. She does this 6 days a week, sometimes 7, if a household needs extra help and is willing to pay a shilling for it. Her weekly earnings, if everything goes well, are around 5 to 7 shillings. Her weekly expenses, stripped to the absolute bone, are about 4 shillings and 6pence. The math works, but only just, and only if nothing breaks, and nothing stays unbroken for long. So, that's who you are tonight. I make these history stories, and usually people tell me they fall asleep somewhere around the point where I start explaining the price of coal, which is fine. That's the whole point. But this one, I want you to stay awake for a little longer than usual, because this particular story isn't really about a place or a building or a battle. It's about a body. It's about what happens to a human body when a system decides it's a resource and not a person. And it's happening right now, which is to say in 1887, which is to say in the city that likes to call itself the greatest on earth. Subscribe if you want. Stay comfortable. But don't get too comfortable. Here we go. Your back wakes up first. Not you. Your back. There's a distinction. Your back has been awake for the last hour, sending messages upward through your spine in the particular language of deep tissue that has been compressed against a straw pallet for 7 hours. A pallet that was adequate maybe 3 years ago, and has since flattened into something not far from sleeping on the floor. The messages are detailed and insistent. They say, "This is not sustainable." They say, "Something in the lower left side is past the point of politely aching and is now actively objecting." They say, "Remember when you were 22? Remember how you could sleep on a stone floor and wake up fine? You remember. You don't bother answering your back. You've long since stopped negotiating with it. You open your eyes to a darkness so complete that for a half second you can't tell if you're awake or still dreaming. The ceiling of the room is about 18 inches above your face when you're lying down. You know this because you've measured it out of curiosity or morbidity. You're no longer sure which. The walls are close. The window, one small square of it facing the court, is showing you a rectangle of darkness only marginally lighter than the room itself. Then the smell finds you. It's not one smell. You keep thinking it should have become one smell by now, the way a city eventually smells like itself rather than its component parts. But the court is never one smell. The court is a negotiation. First, coal smoke, which by November has become so woven into everything, the walls, your hair, the fabric of the shawl hanging on the nail by the door, that you only really smell it when you've been away for an afternoon and come back, which you rarely are and rarely do. Second, the privy in the yard below, shared between 11 families and emptied, when it's emptied at all, by the night soil men who come at 3 in the morning and charge extra not to splash. Last night they came, you heard them. The smell they left behind is the smell of something disturbed rather than removed, a shifting of the problem rather than its solution. Third, something damp. The plaster of the wall nearest the window sweats in autumn, has done for years. The damp comes up through it like breath, like the building is trying to tell you something about its own structural honesty. There's black at the corner where the ceiling meets the wall. You stopped looking at that corner about 2 years ago. Fourth, bread, old bread. The heel of yesterday's loaf is wrapped in cloth on the shelf above the fireplace waiting for this morning. And underneath all of it, the smell of the room itself, of sleep, of 2 bodies breathing in a small space. Yours and your daughter Annie's, who is 19 and sleeping in the inner room behind the curtain, and whose breathing you have been tracking across the last 2 weeks with the focused attention of a woman who has already buried children and knows what the start of something sounds like. But we'll get to Annie. For now, 4:30 in the morning, November 1887. You're 40 years old and you've got to get up. Getting up takes longer than it used to. This is the part nobody tells you about. Not that it changes, but how it changes. When you were 20, getting up meant standing up, a movement, a single moment of decision, and then you were vertical. When you were 30, it already required an intermediate step. Sit up first, pause, assess, then stand. At 40, it's a negotiation with each part of your body in sequence. You push yourself up onto your left elbow. The arm holds, but it complains. A deep ache running from the shoulder down into the wrist, where the joint has been swollen for most of the last year. The doctor at the parish surgery, on the one occasion you could afford to wait the 3 hours necessary to see him, said it was from work, which you already knew. He said rest would help, which you already knew was not an option. He gave you a small paper packet of something white that dissolved in water and helped for about 2 days. You couldn't afford more. Sit up. The room tilts slightly, the way it sometimes does in the mornings now, a brief giddiness that passes if you don't rush it. You learned not to rush it after the morning 6 months ago, when you rushed it and found yourself on the floor with a cut on your chin from the corner of the shelf, explaining to Annie that you were fine, absolutely fine. Just move too fast. Your feet find the floor. The floor is cold, not ordinary cold. November in a building with no heat cold, which is the cold of stone that has been absorbing the night for 8 hours and is now delivering it back through the soles of your feet with considerable efficiency. You've got stockings somewhere. You'll find them later. You sit on the edge of the pallet for a moment, in the dark with your hands on your knees, just breathing. Your hands. If you're ever tempted to forget how old your body actually is, not 40 calendar years, but 40 in this life old, your hands will remind you. They're the hands of a woman who has spent decades in contact with lye and hot water and cold water and beeswax and stone floors and coal scuttles and the rough bristles of brushes that eat through cotton gloves in 2 weeks. The skin across the knuckles has cracked open so many times that the cracks have become permanent features rather than injuries. The right thumbnail is missing at one corner from where a hearth grate caught it in July and it grew back wrong. The palms are padded with callus that starts just below the fingers and runs down to the wrist. A thick ridge of hardened skin that you can press with your thumbnail and feel almost nothing. You used to have nice hands. You remember this specifically. When you married Thomas Pearce in 1866, his mother looked at your hands at the wedding and said, "You had good hands for a working girl," which you understood to mean, for a woman born in this part of London, your hands are not yet destroyed, which was a compliment of a sort, which you accepted as one. Thomas's mother is dead. Thomas is dead. The hands that were once considered not yet destroyed have long since been destroyed. Stand up, the fire is out. You knew this before you looked. The room has the particular dead cold of a space that hasn't had heat in it for 6 hours, a cold with weight to it, with texture. The coals in the grate are ash and grey fragments that crumble if you look at them wrong. You've got coal in the bucket. Enough for the next 2 mornings, maybe 3 if you're careful. After that you'll need to spend 4p at Mr. Burkett's coal cellar on Hanbury Street, and 4p is 4p, and there's nothing in life that doesn't want your 4p. You don't light the fire, not yet, not until you need to. The fire is for Annie, for when she wakes at 6 to get to work. For now, you get dressed in the dark and the cold, and you do it with the efficiency of a woman who has performed this particular act several thousand times and knows the exact sequence of movements to minimize the amount of time any part of her skin is exposed to the November air. Your clothes are on the chair. They're always on the chair. This is the system. The chair is next to the wall, under the shawl. The shawl goes on first, around your shoulders as you sit back down on the pallet's edge to pull on your stockings. Stockings, grey wool, darned at the heel so many times the darn has been darned. They're warm enough, which is the only criterion that matters. Petticoat next, the flannel one in winter. The cotton one hangs on the other nail and will stay there until March. The dress, dark grey wool, buttoned at the back. The buttons small and awkward in cold fingers that won't quite cooperate. You do the bottom 3 by feel, reach back to manage the middle ones, leave the top 2 for later when the light is better. The boots. Your boots are the thing you spend money on when you have money to spend, because boots are load-bearing infrastructure in a life that requires you to walk 6 miles a day on streets that will eat through thin leather in a season. These ones are 18 months old, good quality second-hand from the market at Petticoat Lane, and they are beginning to show it at the left toe where the welt has started to separate. You press the sole back against the upper each morning before you put them on, a habitual check, the way a sailor checks rigging, still holding, for now. You lace them in the dark, fingers moving from memory. Then you stand, and you go to the basin on the washstand. The water in the basin has a skim of ice on top. Not thick ice. November ice. Decorative ice. The kind that shatters at the touch and leaves your hand wet and very cold. You break it with your knuckle. The water beneath is about the temperature of a polite rejection. You wash your face. You do it properly, with the grey soap that lives in the crack of the washstand's marble top. A piece of marble that came with the room, remnant of some earlier and more optimistic domestic era. The soap smells of almost nothing. You work it across your cheeks, your forehead, the back of your neck. The cold water closes up your skin like a fist. You don't have a mirror. You had a mirror, a small one in a tin frame that lived on this same washstand for 11 years, until it fell during the move from the last rooms in Dorset Street and cracked so thoroughly that the 7 years of bad luck were already practically guaranteed. You didn't replace it. A mirror is a luxury you've talked yourself out of wanting, which is a skill you've developed with considerable discipline over the past decade. You dress by the logic of, it's on, it's clean enough, it's appropriate. You don't need to see yourself to know this. You know your own face by touch now. The deep lines that run from the corners of your nose down to your mouth, the softness under your chin that wasn't there at 30, the socket of your right eye where the skin is thin and shows blue in bright light. You know what you look like. You look like a woman who is doing the best she can, which is what you are. The bread from the shelf, halfy, the heel, wrapped in the cloth again for later. You eat it standing up at the window looking down into the court. The court is dark and empty and wet. Cobbles shine black under the faint light from the lamp at the far end. A cat crosses without looking up. Someone has left a bucket out that wasn't there last night. Mrs. Halloran's, probably. The woman in the ground floor rooms who keeps odd hours and odder habits. You eat the bread in 4 bites. It's yesterday's, so it's dense and slightly sour, and you chew it thoroughly because your teeth, on the back left side where the molar had been gone for 2 years, require you to be thoughtful about this. The molar cost 6pence to have pulled. The pain beforehand cost 3 weeks of distraction at work, 2 dropped plates in a kitchen in Bloomsbury, where you were filling in for another charwoman, and one morning where you sat in this window with the cold pressing against your jaw and thought very seriously about whether you could afford to keep going or whether you needed to lie down and stop. Not forever. Just for a day. Just for one day where nothing was required of you. You couldn't afford the day. You pulled through. You always pull through. This is not a triumph. This is just the math of survival. When the only alternative is worse, you keep going. That's not strength. That's arithmetic. The bread is gone. You fold the cloth. Replace it on the shelf. Put on your second shawl. The heavier one, the outdoor one, rough wool in a dark blue that has become almost black with age. You wrap it around your head and shoulders in the way that covers your ears and the back of your neck, leaving your hands free. You take one more look at the curtain that separates you from Annie's alcove room. You listen. She's breathing. Steady. Regular. A small snore on the exhale. Good. You go. The door to the court is a wooden door in a brick arch, swollen in its frame from 20 years of damp, requiring a particular combination of lift and pull and hip pressure to open. You know this combination the way a pianist knows the keys. It yields without sound. You step through into the court. The cold outside is sharper than the cold inside, which is the reliable disappointment of every November morning. You think you've prepared for it in the room, and then the air outside reminds you that it is considerably more serious than you've been giving it credit for. The court is perhaps 12 feet wide, 4 stories of tenements on either side, windows dark except for one on the second floor right. That's old Mr. Seward, who has kidney trouble and keeps candles burning all night. And the faint grey light that comes from the sky above, which at 4:45 in November is the sky of a world that has not yet committed to the concept of mourning. You walk. The court leads out to Brady Street, and Brady Street leads to Whitechapel Road, and Whitechapel Road is never entirely asleep at any hour. But at 5 in the morning it has a particular character that you've come to know well. The market stalls that will fill the road by 8 are not yet here, but the people who will fill those stalls are beginning to arrive. Costermongers pushing barrows, their breath clouding the air, their voices low and rough with the effort of the hour. A horse somewhere ahead, the sound of hooves on stone. The gas lamps throw orange puddles of light on wet cobbles that reflect it back doubled and distorted. You walk. This is the thing about a charwoman's life that is invisible to everyone who doesn't live it. The walking. People think of the work as the scrubbing and the carrying and the polishing, and those things are true. But the walking is where the real damage is done, because the walking happens before and after the work, unpaid, and it happens in all weather, and it happens in boots that are always 1 month away from needing replacement, on streets that are in varying states of hostility to human feet. Your route from Brady Street to the house in Bloomsbury where you work 3 days a week, the Caldwell house, on a square behind the British Museum, a house so thoroughly, comfortably, unconsciously wealthy that sometimes you stand in its kitchen in the morning before anyone is awake and let the size of it fill you up like water fills a glass. That route is 4 miles, give or take. You know it the way you know your own body, where it hurts, where it yields, where the trick is to move carefully, over Commercial Street, where the wind comes through from the east and finds the gap between your shawl and your collar and reminds you exactly how thin your neck is, past Spitalfields Market, where the porters are already at work in the great iron structure, the cold air inside smelling of roots and earth, and the green, sharp smell of vegetables that have been travelling for 2 days. Past Christchurch Spitalfields, Hawksmoor's Church, white stone massive above the roofline of the surrounding streets, and you've been walking past this church your entire life and you still look up at it every morning, because there is something about the way it stands that you can't quite argue with. Something absolute and confident and old, like it knows things about this neighbourhood that the neighbourhood would rather not admit. Your hip has started complaining by the time you pass the church. This is recent. Started maybe 8 months ago. The right hip. Something deep in the joint. A grinding quality when you've been walking for 20 minutes or more. Not constant. Not sharp enough to stop you. Just present. Just there. Like a passenger on every journey informing you of its existence. You adjust your stride. You've learned to do this without thinking. Shift the weight slightly left. Lengthen the step on the right. Reduce the impact. It works mostly. It adds a slight unevenness to your walk that Annie pointed out in the spring, gently, carefully, watching your face as she said it. Mum, you're limping. You told her you weren't. You were. The streets change as you move west. Whitechapel gives way to the edge of the city, and the city gives way to Holborn. And Holborn is a different London than the one you came from. Wider streets, taller buildings, more order, more money in the foundations. The horses here are better fed than the people in Brady Street. The pavements are cleaner. The shop windows, shuttered for the night, are full of things that cost more than a week of your wages. By the time you reach Bloomsbury, the sky has lightened to a pale grey, and the streets have taken on the tentative quality of early morning in a wealthy neighbourhood. Quiet, clean, the sort of quiet that feels purchased. Leaves have been swept from the pavements and piled in the gutters. Railings are painted black and shine with wet. The houses, terraced and 4 stories, look down at you with the polite indifference of things that have never needed to notice anyone like you. You come to the square. You walk around it, not across it. The square's garden is locked, as it always is, locked to keep out precisely the sort of person who walks around it at 5:30 in the morning, shawl wrapped tight against the wind. Number 14. You go to the side entrance, always the side entrance, the area door, down the iron steps to the basement, the door that leads directly to the kitchen. You have a key to this door. This is the significant trust. This is the measure of 9 years of reliable service, a key and the right to arrive before the household wakes. The kitchen at number 14 is warm. This is the first thing every morning, the warmth. The cook, Mrs. Baines, banks the range before she goes to bed, and it runs low through the night, and by morning the kitchen holds a deep stored warmth that the rest of the house won't have until the fires are lit. It smells of yeast and old grease, and something sweetly charred. Residue from last night's dinner, whatever it was, something with onions. You stand in the doorway for exactly 1 second and breathe it in. Then you put your shawls on the hook by the door and you get to work. Your job in this house, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, is the ground floor and the stairs. The entrance hall, the morning room, the dining room, the staircase from basement to attic, and all the fireplaces on the ground and first floor. In practice, this means arrive at 5:30, begin the fires by 6, have the ground floor swept and dusted, and the fireplaces done before the family comes down at 8. 2.5 hours. 6 fires. 4 rooms. 1 very long staircase with 14 steps that must be swept, and the brass rods polished on alternate Mondays. You start in the hall. The hall of number 14 is what you would call, in a neutral voice, a substantial space. The floor is black and white tile. The ceiling is 12 feet. There is a coat stand of mahogany with a mirror above. Itten hooks for 12 coats and an umbrella stand in the shape of an elephant foot. An actual elephant foot, ivory yellow at the top, leather brown at the base. You've been cleaning around this elephant foot for 9 years, and you've never touched it directly. You go around it. You've never asked about it. You've heard that it came from somewhere in India. You don't know more than that. You get the coal scuttle from beside the kitchen range and carry it up the 3 steps to the hall. This is where you feel your back each morning. Not sharply, not collapsibly, just persistently. The way a clock reminds you of time. The scuttle is full and weighs perhaps 20 pounds. By the end of the morning you will have carried it, or a version of it, up and down stairs approximately 11 times. You lay the dining room fire first. You do this from memory, from a physical grammar you've built over years. Lay the paper, crumpled loosely enough to breathe. Lay the kindle in over that. Small sticks first, then larger, not too packed. The fire needs air. Put the coal on top, 2 large pieces and 3 smaller. Leave the grate half open. Strike the match. You have your own matches. They're 3p a box from the chemist on Commercial Street, and this is an expense you do not think about too carefully, because you have a reason not to. The match catches. You hold it to the paper until the paper takes. Then pull your hand back and watch for a moment to make sure. The fire breathes and catches and begins. You move to the morning room. Same process. Then to the hall, where there is a smaller fire. Decorative, really, this one. The hall being too large and too draughty to actually heat with anything short of a small furnace. You light it anyway. It's in your list. Then you start on the floors. The sweeping takes 20 minutes if you're efficient, and the floors haven't been tracked badly since Wednesday. Today, they have been tracked. There are footprints across the dining room rug, men's boots, 2 sets, coming in from outside and crossing to the fireplace and back to the door. Someone had company last night. There is a small dried puddle of mud near the coat stand where an umbrella was shaken out. There is a wine glass on the sideboard in the morning room that wasn't emptied when the table was cleared and has dried to a dark red ring inside. None of this is your job to be irritated about. You note it the way a skilled person notes the conditions of their work, factually, without resentment, as data to be processed. The sweeping, the kneeling to get the dustpan under the chaise longue in the morning room, where there are always at least 3 hairpins and a collection of crumbs from whatever the children eat when they're not supposed to be eating in there. The kneeling is where your hip tells you the most. Not just the grinding now, but a sharp quality on the way down, a breath-catching thing, and then you're down and it's all right. And then on the way up it catches again, differently, and you wait a half second for it to pass, and then you're up and moving. This is the transaction you've been making with your body for years. I need you to do this thing. And the body says, the cost of this thing is increasing. And you say, yes, I know, but I still need it done. And the body does it, but it keeps the ledger. By 6:30 the fires are all going. By 7 you've swept and dusted the ground floor rooms and have started on the stairs. The staircase is narrow, turning twice before it reaches the first floor, and to sweep it properly you have to either start at the top and work down, which means carrying the broom up first and then bringing the dirt down, or start at the bottom, which means sweeping the dirt onto a section you've already cleaned. You start at the top. You always start at the top. Every charwoman starts at the top. This is one of the unwritten laws. 14 steps. You have knees. You know you have knees because they say so on every step. 14 steps up with the broom. Sweep the landing. Work your way down, step by step, collecting the grey fluff that accumulates on Victorian staircases as if the house itself is slowly dissolving. Dust and coal soot and fragments of fabric and human skin, all the fine debris of a household in motion. 14 steps down. Empty the dustpan into the pail. Take the pail to the basement. Repeat. At 7:15, Mrs. Baines arrives in the kitchen. Mrs. Baines is 53 years old, built like a cabinet, and has been cook at number 14 for longer than you've been charwoman. You like her. You've always liked her. She makes no unnecessary conversation, but the necessary conversation she makes is honest and occasionally funny and always practical. Cold one, she says, putting her apron on. Brought ice, you say. Hip bad? Manageable. This is the full depth of your daily check-in. It contains, in this compressed form, everything relevant. Confirmation that the weather is noted. Confirmation that your continued physical functionality is noted. And confirmation that you are not requesting sympathy. Mrs. Baines nods and fills the kettle and puts it on the range. And you go back up to finish the staircase. At 7:45 you make yourself a cup of tea in the kitchen, using the leaves from the kitchen's caddy. Mrs. Baines has given you implicit permission for this over 9 years in the form of never once commenting on it. And you drink it standing at the kitchen work table, holding the cup with both hands, letting the heat work through your palms. Tea, hot, sweet, if Mrs. Baines has left the sugar within reach. This is, without exaggeration, one of the finest things in your life right now. The specific combination of warmth and sweetness and the standing still in a warm room after 2 hours of cold and kneeling and carrying. You drink it slowly. You have 8 minutes before the family begins to come down. You think about Annie. Annie has been coughing, not a cold cough. You know cold coughs. You've had 6 children through colds, fevers, croup, and the other things that take children in this part of London, and you know the texture and geography of illness in small bodies the way a doctor knows medicine, empirically, exhaustively, at cost. This cough has a different quality. It comes in the evening. It started maybe 3 weeks ago, late October. Just a clearing of the throat, really, the kind of thing you tell yourself is nothing, because telling yourself it's nothing is how you get through a day. But it's got heavier since then. And last week you woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of Annie in the next room. Not coughing, but gagging. A deep and effortful sound that brought you upright, with the cold moving through you in a way the November air never quite manages. She'd been fine when you went back in. She was sitting up in her bed, breathing carefully, and she'd looked at you and said, "Mum, I'm all right. Just the cold air got in me." And you'd looked at her face in the candlelight and said, "Yes, all right," and gone back to bed. But you hadn't slept. Annie works at the match factory on Bow Lane. She's been there 3 years, since she was 16. She makes boxes, the smaller work, not the actual dipping, just the assembly of the wooden boxes that hold the matches. This is considered the cleaner work at the factory, the work given to girls who are quick-fingered and light-handed. She earns 4 shillings a week. She brings home 3 and keeps 1 for herself, and you have never suggested she should keep less. The match factory has been in the newspapers this year. There have been articles. Men in Parliament have made speeches. There's a woman called Annie Besant, a journalist and agitator, who has been writing about the conditions at the factories, the fines, the wages, the long hours. There is talk of a strike. You read one of the articles in a newspaper that came into the house, wrapped around parcels from the market, smoothed flat and left in the kitchen by Mrs. Baines, who knows you can read and says nothing about it. The article described the phosphorus, which is the thing used to make the matches strike. Phosphorus is white in its raw state and glows faintly in the dark. It is also, it turns out, poisonous. It gets into the air of the dipping room as fine white particles. The girls who work in the dipping room breathe it in day after day, month after month. The article described what the phosphorus does to a person's jaw. You didn't finish the article. Annie works in the box room, not the dipping room. You've told yourself this is the important distinction. You've told yourself this approximately every day for 3 years, but the factory floor is one building. The air moves between rooms. The girls eat their lunches at work benches. Annie has told you, in passing, not thinking it was important, that on some days you can see the white dust on everything, on the surfaces, on your clothes when you come home, in the corners of your eyes. This is what you think about while you're drinking your tea in the kitchen at number 14. This is what your body carries that the work doesn't account for. The weight of what you know and what you don't, and what the gap between them might mean. You hear the bell from upstairs. The family is stirring. You finish your tea, rinse the cup, and go back to work. By 8 o'clock, number 14 has transformed. This is the thing that nobody in this house will think about today, and you're not saying this with bitterness, or not only as bitterness, but simply as a statement of fact. By 8 o'clock, the evidence that you have been here for 2.5 hours has been entirely removed. The fires burn cleanly, the floors are swept. The coal dust that accumulates on every horizontal surface overnight has been wiped away. The hall smells of beeswax from the floor polish you applied to the tiles near the door. The house has been, in the technical sense, prepared for its occupants. And you are in the kitchen, invisible. Not literally invisible. Mrs. Baines is there, the kitchen maid is there, and you are there, moving methodically between the kitchen and the basement storeroom, but invisible in the sense that means your work is meant to have no visible origin. The Caldwells. Mr. Caldwell, who is a solicitor. Mrs. Caldwell, who reads novels and does charitable work in Bloomsbury. Their 3 children aged 8, 11 and 15. Will come down to their clean house this morning, and their experience will be of a house that is simply clean. Not of a woman who arrived in the dark and carried coal and knelt on 14 stairs. This is the contract. It is unwritten and unspoken, but absolute. You are not to be seen doing the work that keeps this house alive. You understand this. You have always understood this. It's not different from the way the meat doesn't want you thinking about the slaughterhouse. The Caldwells need their floors clean and their fires lit in the same way they need meat at dinner, which is to say completely and without detailed attention to how it happens. But there are mornings, not often, just occasionally, when your hip is particularly bad or your hands have split open again overnight and the cold water in the morning didn't help. There are mornings when you stand in this kitchen and feel something that isn't quite anger, but is in the same family. A kind of noticing, a counting up. This morning is one of those mornings. You're on your knees in the dining room. The family hasn't come down yet. You have perhaps 5 minutes, cleaning the grate. The ash from last night's fire comes out in dry grey clouds that drift up and settle on your face, in the creases of your eyes. You've got the small brass shovel in your right hand and the bucket with the wet newspaper at the bottom. Wet newspaper, so the ash doesn't rise. And you're working methodically, shovel by shovel, and your hip is saying what it always says by now, and your wrist aches with the particular complaint of joints that have spent their whole lives in water. Your hands against the grate. The cast iron is cold and rough under your fingers, gritty with residue. You feel the familiar split at the base of your right index finger, catch on the edge of the grate. A sting, brief and specific, a small fresh opening of skin that you've reopened approximately every 3rd day for the past month. You sit back on your heels and look at your hand for a moment. A small dark bead of blood wells up at the crease. You press it against your apron and go back to work. In 1887, there are no rubber gloves. There is no such thing as moisture repair cream. There is no ergonomic anything. There is lard sometimes, which you rub into your hands at night, a practice so old and so standard among women who work like you that it's practically ceremonial. The last act of each day, rubbing cheap lard into skin that will have cracked open again by morning anyway. It helps, marginally. It helps the way the wet newspaper helps with the ash. It makes a difficult situation slightly less difficult rather than actually solving it. You finish the grate. You stand up. Hip, wrist, back, knee, the whole orchestra of complaint making its morning contribution. And you carry the bucket to the back door and empty the ash into the ash bin and go back inside. At 8:15, you hear the children's feet on the stairs. You move to the kitchen. This is your professional skill at its most refined, knowing when to be present and when to not be present. You know the Caldwell family's rhythms precisely. Mr. Caldwell comes down at 8:30, eats breakfast in 15 minutes, leaves for his chambers at 9. Mrs. Caldwell follows at 9, eats with the children, reads her letters at the breakfast table. The children leave for school at 8:45 with their nurse. None of them will come into the kitchen while you're there. This isn't policy. There's no rule. It's just that the kitchen is a below-stairs space and the children are above-stairs children, and this geography is maintained by a force as invisible and powerful as gravity, except once. About a year ago, the youngest, a girl called Edith who is 8 and has her father's nose and her mother's way of saying whatever she thinks the moment she thinks it, came to the kitchen door looking for Mrs. Baines to ask about her breakfast. She found you instead, standing at the table with your hands in a bowl of dirty water washing out the polishing cloths. She looked at you for a moment. "You have very red hands," she said. "Yes," you said. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes." She considered this. She was wearing a white pinafore and her hair was in 2 dark plaits with ribbons on the ends. She looked like something from a painting about what childhood ought to be. "I'm sorry," she said, and left. You stood at that bowl for about 30 seconds after she left, not moving, not polishing, just feeling the hot water around your cold hands. Then you went back to work. You leave number 14 at 11. On 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, here in Bloomsbury, you do your morning's work and then you have a choice. Go directly home, which takes an hour walking, or stop along the way for whatever needs to be done. Shopping, the pawnbroker, the penny post if there's a letter to send, the parish dispensary if someone needs the dispensary. Today, it's the market. The market on Whitechapel Road is in full flow by noon. A river of humanity and commerce that runs the length of the road. Stalls pushed right up to the edge of the pavement. Sellers calling their prices in voices seasoned by years of outdoor work in November. You've been buying food at this market for 20 years. You know its patterns the way you know the Caldwell house, where the good costermongers are, which stalls mark down after noon when they want to clear stock, where the meat is reliable and where it is not. You have 2 shillings and 4pence in your pocket. This is Thursday's money from a second job, Wednesday evening, 3 hours cleaning at a lodging house on Commercial Street that pays by the hour. Terrible work, that one. The kind of lodging house that charges 4pence a night for a bed in a room with 12 beds, and the floors reflect this. But it's money, and money is the only currency that works. 2 shillings and 4pence. You do the accounting automatically, walking. You've been doing this kind of accounting for so long that it's moved below the level of conscious thought. It happens like breathing, like your body telling you your hip hurts. Just a constant low-level processing of what's owed and what's possible. The weekly rent is 4 shillings and 6pence. Due Saturday, you've got it barely. Coal. You need 4pence for Tuesday's supply, already mentioned. Food for the week. You spend about 1 shilling and 9pence on food. This covers bread, a large loaf every other day, and a smaller one on the days between. Potatoes when they're cheap. Bacon scraps from the end-of-day market. The bits that have been lying out all day and can't be sold to people with better options. Occasionally an egg. Tea. A bone from the butcher for broth, which you make on Sunday mornings when there's time, and which stretches across 3 or 4 meals if you're careful about it. Occasionally, very occasionally, not on bad weeks, only on weeks when the numbers have cooperated, a piece of fish from the fried fish shop on Brick Lane. A penny for Annie. Annie doesn't eat enough. She never says so, but you watch how she eats, the careful portions, the pauses between bites that mean she's deciding whether she needs more rather than whether she wants more. And you've always known, the difference between deciding you're full and deciding you can stop eating is a distinction that only makes sense in certain economic circumstances. You're at the market. The wind is coming from the east, pushing the smell of the stalls toward you in waves. Fish, raw meat, the sweet rot of vegetables going past their best, the coal and dog and mud smell of the street itself. A barrow woman near the crossing is selling hot potatoes. Actual hot potatoes, baked in foil, 3p each. The smell is extraordinary, a physical thing, a full stop in your walk. You haven't eaten since the bread at 5 this morning. Your stomach knows about the hot potato, 3p. You walk past it. Bread at the baker's, a large loaf, 4p. Potatoes from the barrow that's been out since morning and is now selling the last of his stock at a penny for £3 because he wants to be home. 1.50. Bacon scraps from the pork butcher on the corner, end of the tray, past their best, 3 strips for a halfpenny. A small amount of tea from the grocer in loose leaf, 1p. Total, 4p halfpenny. Plus you need to set aside the 4p for coal. That's 8p halfpenny of the 2 shillings, 4p gone. You have 1 shilling and 7.5p remaining, which needs to survive until Saturday, which is 3 days. This is sustainable. It's always sustainable until it isn't. You carry the bread and the potatoes and the bacon scraps in your basket, the wicker basket that lives on the hook beside your outdoor shawls, that has lived there for so long it has a permanent hook mark in its handle, and you walk home. The walk home is the same route in reverse. You don't notice the landmarks the way you might notice them if you were walking this route for the first time. You notice the condition of the pavement, wet in the usual places, an area near the crossing on Commercial Street that has been badly repaired and rocks slightly underfoot. You notice other women walking the same direction with the same baskets. You nod at 2 women you know by name or by face, which in this neighbourhood is the same thing. You get back to Brady Street at 12:40. You go up the stairs to your rooms, the 2 rooms, the outer room, approximately 12 by 10 feet, contains the fireplace, the straw pallet where you sleep, the washstand, the chair, the shelf, the table with 2 stools, a window facing the court, a hook on the door for the shawls, the trunk under the pallet that holds your winter blanket and your other dress, the brown one, and the bundle of papers that contains Thomas's death certificate, and the children's baptism records, and the letter from your sister in Birmingham that came 3 years ago, and which you have not answered yet. The inner room, calling it a room is generous, but there is a wall and a curtain and a certain amount of privacy, is perhaps 8 by 8. Annie's bed, a real iron-framed bed that was Thomas's great purchase during the first year of their marriage in 1866, when he was still well and still working, and still had the kind of optimism that makes furniture seem like a reasonable investment. A small chest for Annie's things. The window in this room faces the wall of the next building 3 feet away. Light, such as it is, comes through the outer room. This is where 2 people live. By the standards of the East End in 1887, this is not particularly terrible. You know people who live in 1 room. You know a family of 5 in a single room on Flower and Dean Street. You know a woman down the court who shares with 2 other women and child that belongs to one of them, and they take turns sleeping in the bed. Your 2 rooms with only you and Annie constitute a relative prosperity. You set the bread on the shelf. You fill the pot with water from the bucket. Water that came from the standpipe at the end of the court this morning before you left. a daily task so embedded in your routine you sometimes can't remember doing it and have to check the bucket to know if you have. The pot goes on the hob of the fireplace, which you now light. This is the coal you could not afford to burn this morning. The coal is grey and dense and will burn for 3 hours if you don't push it too hard. Fire, heat, a kettle beginning to work itself toward the boil. You sit down, the chair by the fireplace. You sit down in it the way a person who's been standing for 8 hours sits down, slowly, at an angle, with a brief closing of your eyes that is not sleep but is adjacent to sleep. A few seconds of simply not being in motion. Your feet. You unlace your boots, slowly, methodically, beginning with the bows and then each cross of the lace. The boots come off and your feet breathe, and the relief is so specific and physical that it's almost embarrassing. You flex your toes. Your right foot has a small soft area on the heel where a blister formed in September and healed into a thickened pad of callus. Your left foot has a corn on the small toe that you've been attending to with a small knife every Sunday for 2 years. A war of attrition you're winning only barely. The kettle boils. Tea. You make it in the chipped brown pot that lives on the mantelpiece and drink it from the one cup without a crack, because Annie gets the cracked one when she's home, and this is a distinction you've maintained without discussion or awareness. Just a small reserved gesture. One cup slightly better than the other, given to the person you love most. You sit with the tea. You have 30 minutes before you need to go back out. There's a message to deliver for Mrs. Baines, who is paying you a halfpenny to take a paper to an address on Stepney Green that is out of her way. A halfpenny is a halfpenny. So you sit. And in those 30 minutes, here is what happens in your body. The warmth from the fire reaches your back first. The specific muscles on either side of your spine that have been holding everything together since 5 this morning, and they begin, cautiously, to release. The hip eases in a way it never quite does while you're walking, a gradual giving way of the tension that holds the joint together through its working hours. Your wrists, warmed by the teacup, stop their background complaint. Your hands are in your lap and you look at them. There's a story in these hands that your face doesn't quite tell yet. Your face is tired. You know this. You can feel the heaviness of it, the way your expression doesn't lift quite as easily as it used to, but your hands are the actual record. The story of lye and cold water and grate cleaning and floor scrubbing and the particular violence of textile work when you were younger, before the charring, when you worked the looms at Bethnal Green and came home every night with your fingers raw from the thread and your hearing slightly diminished from the noise. The story of 6 pregnancies. The story of Thomas's illness in his last 3 years, when you washed his sheets every day because the doctor said to, and because it was the only thing you could actually do, and the disease wept out of him, and you washed it away. You've washed so much away with these hands. Your tea is almost gone. You drink the last of it. Stand up. Lace your boots back on, tight enough to walk, but not so tight as to aggravate the corn. Wrap the shawls back around you. Outdoor shawl, heavier. Take the paper Mrs. Baines gave you from the shelf. Go. Stepney Green is 20 minutes east, and you take it at the pace that your hip will allow, which this afternoon is slightly slower than the morning because the morning's work has used something up that hasn't been replenished. Not dramatically. Not a limp, not a stop and rest pace. Just the particular economy of a body in the afternoon of its workday, doing the calculation of effort versus reserve. The streets of the afternoon are different from the streets of the early morning. busier, dirtier, louder. The costermongers are at their loudest. They'll start to pack up in 2 hours, so the afternoon is the full pitch, everyone selling as hard as they can. Children are out of school at various times, depending on which school and which teacher, and they move through the streets in packs, loud and directionless, and full of the particular energy of people who haven't yet learned that energy is finite. You deliver the paper to the address on Stepney Green. A woman answers the door, not the woman you expected, too young, clearly a servant, looks at the paper, says thank you, closes the door. Halfpenny earned. On the way back, you pass the pharmacy on Commercial Street. You stop outside. The pharmacy is owned by a small, quick Welsh man named Mr. Davies, who knows everyone in the neighbourhood by sight and by ailment, which is an intimate kind of knowledge. The pharmacy smells of camphor and something chemical sweet, a smell that you associate with the inside of doctors' offices with the particular sensation of being assessed. You've been meaning to come here for 2 weeks. You go in. Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Davies says from behind his counter. He's making up something in a small paper packet, counting out white pills with a spatula. He doesn't look up, but he's seen you. He always sees everyone. My daughter, you say. The cough. He looks up now. How long? 3-4 weeks, getting heavier. Is she bringing anything up? Not that I've seen. Pain in the chest. She hasn't said, but she wouldn't. He nods. He knows you, which means he knows Annie, which means he knows that Annie would not say she was in pain until she was falling down with it. Where does she work? Match factory. Bow Lane. A pause. It's a specific kind of pause. The kind that has content in it that Mr. Davies is deciding whether to share with you or keep back. You've been the recipient of this kind of pause before. From doctors, from the midwife who attended your 4th delivery, from the parish officer who came to see Thomas in his last months. A pause that contains information that the pauser believes you can't handle or shouldn't have or wouldn't understand. You've always found that these pauses underestimate you considerably. Which room, he says. Box room, not dipping. Another pause, fractionally shorter. The cough, he says carefully, choosing his words with the deliberateness that tells you everything, needs to be seen by a doctor. I know it does. I mean soon, Mrs. Pierce. I know. The money for a doctor's visit, 2 shillings. 2 shillings is, you run it automatically, and 3 hours of cleaning at the lodging house. Half a week of tea and bread, roughly. 2 shillings is not impossible, but it is not comfortable, and comfortable has not been a state you've inhabited for some time. There's the dispensary on Mile End Road, Mr. Davies says. He knows your circumstances without asking about them. This is the calculus of the neighbourhood's pharmacist. He knows what people can and can't afford before they do. They see charity cases 3 days a week, Thursday mornings. Tomorrow is Thursday. Right, you say. He gives you a small bottle of something, camphor in oil, with a cloth tied around the neck. Rub on her chest at night. Temporary, but it helps with the breathing. How much? 3p. You have the 3p. Barely. You pay it and take the bottle and put it in your basket beside the bread. Outside on the pavement you stand for a moment in the cold air. You are very good at not feeling things during the day. This is a survival technique so fundamental to your existence that you've almost forgotten it's a technique. You simply do not feel most things until you have time to feel them, which is usually never. Emotion is a luxury with carrying costs you can't afford during working hours. But there on Commercial Street at 2 p.m. with Mr. Davies's bottle in your basket, you feel something for about 4 seconds. a cold, bright fear, very specific, located somewhere in your sternum. The fear of what the word phosphorus does to people. The fear of what 3 years breathing factory air does to a 19-year-old lung. 4 seconds, then it goes back where it came from. You walk home. She comes in at 7. You've had the fire going since 5, the larger fire. All 3 coals you could spare and 1 more, because today the warmth is worth more than the economy. The potatoes are in a pot on the hob, softened and fragrant. The bacon scraps have been fried in their own fat and are sitting on the shelf on a cracked plate covered with a cloth to stay warm. You hear her on the stairs before you hear the door, her step which you know precisely. A quick, slightly heavy step on the left foot, lighter on the right, 4 stairs, and then the landing, and then the door handle. She comes in. Annie at 19 is what you are at 19, which is to say thin and tired and young in a way that the tiredness hasn't quite reached yet. She has Thomas's colouring, dark hair, dark eyes that go almost black in the firelight, and your chin, and a mouth that goes slightly sideways when she's trying not to show how she feels, which is a Thomas thing too, actually, now that you think about it. She's wearing her factory dress, dark blue serge, and her boots, and a shawl that she wraps differently from you, across both shoulders and tied at the front, rather than knotted behind. She looks at you when she comes in, reads your face in the particular way of children who grew up watching their parents' face for information. "What?" she says. "Nothing," you say. "Wash up, dinner's ready." She doesn't say anything. She takes off her shawl, washes her hands and face at the basin with the kind of thoroughness that tells you she's been careful about the factory smell today. Has been careful since you mentioned it last month. Careful in that deliberate way that means she knows you're watching. She sits down at the table. You bring the potatoes. You sit across from her. She eats. You eat. For a few minutes neither of you speaks, and this silence is a comfortable one. The silence of 2 people who know each other well enough to not require performance. The fire crackles and spits slightly on the left side, where there's a damp coal you shouldn't have put in but did. "Heard Mr. Booth's people are doing a survey," Annie says finally, "about wages in the East End. Martha's husband was asked questions about his work." "What kind of questions?" "How much he earns, what they spend, whether they can afford the rent." She pulls a small piece of potato apart with her fork. "I suppose they want to write it all down." "People have been writing it all down for years," you say. "Doesn't seem to change much." Annie makes a sound that is not quite a laugh. "Miss Besant's going to speak at the factory next week. They're saying some of the girls might walk out." "Walk out?" You look at her across the table. "And lose the wages?" "And lose the wages." Annie's fork is still. "Miss Besant says the conditions are—" "She says the women deserve better." "I don't doubt the women deserve better," you say carefully. "I'm asking about the wages." "I know." Annie looks up. "I know, Mum." A pause. "You don't have to go," you say, "to the speech, or the strike, if it comes to it." "I might want to." "I know you might." Another pause. The fire crackles. "How's the cough?" you say. She opens her mouth, closes it again. In that half second you see her decide which version of this she's going to give you, and she decides on the honest one, which tells you something about how she's feeling. "Bad today," she says quietly. "Worse in the afternoon." You get up without speaking, go to the shelf, get the bottle from Mr. Davies. You hand it to her across the table. "Camphor oil for your chest. Tonight." She looks at the bottle for a moment, her dark eyes in the firelight. Very still. Mum, there's a dispensary on Mile End Road, you say. Thursday mornings. I'm coming with you tomorrow. You're working Friday. The dispensary is Thursday. Annie is quiet. It's probably just the cold air, she says. Probably, you say. Neither of you finishes that sentence. You eat the rest of your dinner in the comfortable and terrible silence of people who love each other and are afraid and know better than to say the specific thing they're afraid of, because naming it might make it more real. The fire burns down by 9. You bank it for the night, carefully, conserving what's left. The wind is getting up outside. You can hear it in the court, moving through the chimney pots, a low sound that the city makes in autumn when it means it. Annie goes to wash. You prepare the bread for morning. Later, in the darkness of your own side of the curtain, you hear her voice. Mum. Yes, a pause. The camphor oil is strong. I know, sorry. It's all right, a pause. Mum. Yes, I'm all right. You lie in the dark and listen to her breathe. You listen for a long time. Let me step back here for a moment and tell you what you know, because what you know is worse than what Annie has told you. It's 1887, and the match industry runs on a substance called white phosphorus. White phosphorus is not the same as the phosphorus your body uses. That's a different, benign variety. White phosphorus is the kind that glows in the dark, that burns in air. That is, in its pure form, essentially a slow poison delivered through the lungs and the mouth and the skin. The girls in the match factories, and they're mostly girls, 14, 15, 16 years old, because small quick fingers are the premium skill required, they breathe this stuff in for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. The air in the dipping rooms is thick with white phosphorus dust in a state fine enough to inhale. It settles on surfaces, it gets on hands, it gets on bread and potatoes eaten at the workbench. What the phosphorus does, given time, is this. It settles in the jaw, in the bone itself, through the teeth, or through microscopic injuries in the gums. It begins to poison the bone from the inside. The jaw begins to swell. It becomes hot and painful, and then the bone begins to die. Literally dies from the inside out. In the late stages, the affected jaw glows in the dark. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I know this is a sleep story, and I know I'm not supposed to be doing this to you, but sit with it. The bone glows in the dark, like the phosphorus it came from, like something from a fairy tale that has missed the point of what fairy tales are supposed to do. The doctors call it phosphonecrosis. The workers call it simply phossy jaw. The only treatment is to remove the entire jaw surgically, which in 1887 is not a minor procedure, which leaves the person unable to eat, speak or breathe normally, which most patients don't survive. The match companies know about this. Some of them have been using a different, safer formulation, red phosphorus, which doesn't do this, for 20 years. They've known it was possible. They've been choosing not to use it, because white phosphorus is cheaper, and cheaper is the only calculation that matters. Annie works in the box room, not the dipping room, but the factory floor is one building. You read the article in Mrs. Baines's kitchen and you stopped reading at the part about the jawbone, and you folded the newspaper back up, and you washed the cups, and you went back to work, and you have not thought about it directly since that day, in the same way you do not touch the damp corner of the room with the black mould. You know it's there, you know it's worsening, you simply cannot solve it right now, and so you keep it in your peripheral vision and move around it. But tonight, listening to Annie breathe, the peripheral vision has moved to centre. You're very still in your bed. You think it's probably the cold air. the damp November air getting into her lungs. The factory buildings aren't warm and she walks a mile each way and the shawl she has isn't thick enough. That's what it is. You think this until you half believe it. And then you hear her shift in the next room and make a small sound in her sleep. And the fear comes back briefly in the space between her exhale and the next sound. You have already buried 3 children. You know exactly what that costs. You close your eyes. Tomorrow is Thursday. The Mile End Road Dispensary is a 2-story building behind a set of iron railings next to a Methodist chapel about 15 minutes walk from Brady Street. Thursday mornings it opens its doors at 8 and sees charity cases until noon. In practice, this means a queue that forms by 7. You and Annie are in the queue by 6:55. There are 20 people ahead of you already. The queue moves in silence, mostly. The people in it have the specific patience of those who have learned that patience is the price of cheap medicine. An elderly man with a cough that makes yours sound like nothing. A woman with a child on her hip and a second child at her knee. The infant flushed with fever. 2 young men from what looks like a building site, one with his hand wrapped in a cloth that has been soaked through. A girl of about 12 standing alone, clutching a handkerchief, looking at the ground. Annie stands beside you with her shawl pulled around her and her chin slightly raised, the way she faces things she doesn't want to be facing. You stand beside her, close enough to be touching along the arms, a warmth between you. It's cold, not as cold as the past week. The November sky above is grey and low and windless, which is London's idea of a mercy. Your breath clouds slightly when you exhale. Annie's does too. You watch her breath. "Mum," she says quietly, not looking at you. "Yes." If the doctor says something, then we'll deal with it. I don't want to leave the factory. I know. We need the money. I know that too. She's quiet. Then, Mrs. Harrison on Hanbury Street had to leave her position at the laundry because of her chest. She was doing washing at home after that, brought in 2pence a day. You know Mrs. Harrison. You know exactly how the rest of that story goes. "Let's wait," you say, and hear what the doctor says. The queue moves. By 8:40, you're inside. The dispensary. Waiting room is a long, low room with benches along the walls and a smell that sits between carbolic acid and human illness in a way that is impossible to find comforting. A nurse in a grey dress moves between the benches, speaking to people quietly. The child with the fever has started to cry softly, a thin, persistent sound that rises and falls. You wait another 30 minutes. When Annie's name is called, you gave it at the door, Annie Pierce, 19 Match Factory. You stand up with her and the nurse says, "Family can wait here." And Annie looks at you and you look at Annie and you sit back down. She goes through the door alone. You sit on the bench. You put your hands in your lap. You look at your hands, the familiar landscape of them, the splits, the callus, the slightly swollen knuckle on the right hand that has been swollen since July. You think about what Thomas would say. Thomas died in 1881, the lung disease, which in this part of London in this period means he was one of approximately 40,000 people who die of tuberculosis in England each year. He went the way they all go, slowly first, then quickly. A cough that was just a cough, and then wasn't. You nursed him for 2 years, properly nursed him in the way that takes everything out of you. The watching, the washing, the counting of days, the learning to read the difference between a bad day and a good day. The particular optimism of good days and what good days eventually cost. He was a good man, a bricklayer from Shadwell, patient and methodical, with large, quiet hands and a way of explaining things to the children. The why of everything, always the why, that Annie still uses when she's telling a story. He would have known what to say right now, sitting on this bench. Probably something simple, practical, along the lines of, "Wait and hear what the doctor says, Maggie. No use worrying until you've got something specific to worry about," which is exactly what you told Annie 15 minutes ago, which is a comfort in its way. Annie comes back through the door at 9:35. You look at her face. Her face is doing the sideways mouth thing, the Thomas thing. "Doctor says I've got inflammation in the lungs," she says, sitting beside you. Her voice is perfectly steady. Lower left. He says it's common in factory work. He gave me something. She shows you a small brown bottle. He said I need rest and clean air. What else? She looks at you. He asked about the factory. I told him box room. He said to watch the gums, and if there's any swelling in the jaw to come back immediately. The room is very quiet around you, or perhaps your hearing has narrowed. Right, you say. He said probably it's just the inflammation, the cold, the factory air. He said if I rest, you're not going to be able to rest. I know that. We'll find a way to get cleaner air, you say. The window in your room. We can leave it open at night, even cold as it is. Cold air, Mum. Clean cold air. There's a difference. There's a park. Victoria Park the Sunday after next, if the weather holds. An afternoon off. Annie looks at you for a moment. The sideways mouth relaxes slightly. You haven't had a Sunday off in the Sunday after next, you repeat. She takes your hand, briefly, firmly, your cracked red hand in her thinner, slightly less cracked hand, a grip that lasts about 3 seconds and then releases. You both stand up. You walk home. On the way back from the dispensary, you stop at the pawnbroker on Commercial Street. The pawnbroker is a man called Mr. Levy, who's occupied the same premises. 3 brass balls above a window full of rings, clocks and items that used to mean something to somebody for 30 years. He knows you. You've been bringing things to Mr. Levy for a decade. Today, you have Thomas's watch. Thomas's watch is a silver pocket watch, made in Birmingham in 1860, given to him by his foreman when he finished his apprenticeship. He kept it until he couldn't work anymore. When he died, he left it to you, not because you needed a watch, but because he needed to leave you something, and the watch was the only thing with actual value. You've pawned it twice before, redeemed it twice. Each time it costs slightly more to get it back than you paid for it, which is the algebra of pawnbroking. The interest accumulates, and the principal is whatever Mr. Levy decides it is, which is less than the watch is. Worth and more than you'll get anywhere else. You put it on the counter. Mr. Levy picks it up, turns it over, opens the back, closes it. 3 and 6pence, he says. 4. 3 and 8pence, that's it. 3 shillings and 8pence. This will cover the doctor's medicine for Annie, which will need to be refilled next week at a cost you haven't calculated yet. A new pair of stockings, because yours have passed the point where darning is structurally useful, and, possibly, fish from the fried fish shop once, on a Friday when the lines are short. 3 and 8pence, you say. Mr. Levy makes the note in his ledger. You take the money. He puts the watch in the tray under the counter. You know exactly what the watch looks like in that tray. You've seen it. Silver, slightly tarnished at the case's edge. The monogram on the back. T.P. Thomas Pearce, in a florid Victorian script. Your children's father. held in a pawnbroker's tray on Commercial Street. The usual arrangement, Mr. Levy says. 6 weeks, you say. He writes it down. You leave. Outside, you count the money in your palm. 6 coins, a mix of shillings and sixpences. You put them in the pocket of your dress, the inner pocket that buttons. 6 weeks to redeem the watch. 6 weeks is enough time, usually. Here's what I want you to understand, and I know you're getting tired, and I know this part is not the falling asleep part of the story, and I promise we'll get there. But I want you to understand this first. In 1887, the average life expectancy for a working-class woman in the East End of London is 47 years. 47. The average, which means that the women who made it further than that, and some did, some made it to 60, some to 70, tougher than iron, full of the particular indestructibility of people who have survived everything. Those women are pulling the number up. The women below the average, the ones who died at 25 of puerperal fever, at 30 of tuberculosis, at 38 of exhaustion and cold and nothing in particular, they're pulling it down. You are 40. You are statistically more than halfway through your probable life. Your body has absorbed the following to date: 6 pregnancies. The physical cost of pregnancy alone, the nausea, the weight, the changed skeleton, the hemorrhage risk at delivery, and the physical labour of childbirth performed in a room like yours with no doctor, just a midwife who may or may not have washed her hands. This is, across 6 pregnancies, a substantial physical debt. Your pelvis has shifted. Your abdominal muscles, the ones that hold everything in its place, have never fully recovered from the 6th delivery in 1876, when the baby came too fast and too large, and you tore in a way that the midwife stitched up with gut thread, and which healed badly, leaving you with a pulling sensation low down on the left side that is, you suspect, the structural explanation for some of what your hip is now complaining about. 20 years of lye water. Lye is the alkaline solution used in washing before chemical detergents, made from wood, ash, leached in water. It dissolves grease and softens fabrics and also eats through skin over time with tremendous efficiency. Your hands are the most visible record of this, but your forearms, from the way they've spent so many years in hot lye water to the elbow, have a dryness and cracking that no amount of lard truly reaches. 20 years of coal dust. Coal dust is not simply black stuff. It's fine particulate matter that embeds in the lungs and does not come out. You don't have a chest condition. Not yet, not that you know of. But every charwoman of 40 in London has been breathing coal into her lungs since she could walk, and the accumulated deposit of 24 years of lighting and carrying and cleaning fires sits in your chest like a mortgage you haven't been told about yet. The hunger, not dramatic starvation. You're not starving. You want to be clear about this. You are not starving. But chronic undereating, the kind that happens when the money runs short for 2 or 3 days at a stretch, when you quietly eat half of what you should so that Annie can eat enough. This does things to a body across a decade. It takes calcium from bones. It slows healing. It makes the immune system conservative in ways that become visible the next time something serious comes through the neighbourhood, and things are always coming through the neighbourhood. The cold of every winter, every unheated room, every morning walk, every hour of kneeling on stone floors in houses that are not heated for your benefit. Cold does something to joints. You know this empirically. You know it in your hip and your wrist and the backs of both knees. This is the body you live in. This is the body that gets up at 4:30 every morning and walks 4 miles and carries coal scuttles and kneels on staircases and washes other people's fireplaces out and walks 4 miles home and then worries about its daughter until sleep finally comes, it is, all things considered, doing remarkably well. Friday morning is different from the other mornings only in the small ways that accumulate across a week. Your back is slightly worse. This is Friday's pattern. The week's work has stacked on top of itself, and by Friday the lower back has something to say about it that it was only hinting at on Monday. You get up the same way. You wash the same way. The bread on the shelf is the last of the week's loaf, a smaller piece than you'd like, and you eat it with the same standing discipline at the window, looking down at the grey morning court. Annie is still asleep. She came home yesterday evening quieter than usual, ate the broth you made from the Sunday bone, still going, still faintly sweet with marrow, and went to bed at 8. You heard her cough twice before you fell asleep, 3 times after you woke at 2. The medicine from the dispensary sat on the shelf above the fireplace in its brown bottle, and you had given it to her with the cup of tea at 7, measured exactly as the doctor said, and she had taken it without comment. You go to the Caldwell house. The Friday routine is slightly different. Friday you do the upper floors, the bedrooms, the nursery, the bathroom. The bathroom in this house is a late addition. They had the pipes put in 4 years ago, a glazed tub and a water closet on the first floor landing, a luxury that still strikes you every time as almost theatrical in its scale. Hot water from taps, a tub that holds enough water for a proper bath. The bathroom is yours to clean every Friday. You clean the tub, you clean the tiles, you empty and clean the water closet, which requires the kind of focused professional detachment from your sense of smell that you have developed into an art form. You do this work efficiently and invisibly and well. By 9 o'clock the house is done. Mrs. Baines makes you tea. You drink it at the kitchen table this time. It's Friday. Mrs. Baines is in an expansive mood. There's a wedding in her family next week. She talks about it while she makes pastry. Her niece, a girl in Tottenham, a young man who works for the railway. You listen. You like this. This is something you don't have language for exactly. Sitting in a warm kitchen with another woman while she talks about ordinary good things. It doesn't cost anything. It gives something back. Small talk, people call it, and it's not small. It's the human texture of a day. Your Annie's not well, Mrs. Baines says, not a question. Taking medicine from the dispensary. The chest? Yes. Mrs. Baines is quiet for a moment. Her hands continue with the pastry, pressing, turning, pressing. She has the hands of a cook, strong and flour-white, expert. A girl in my sister's court, she says finally, at the match factory on Stratford, 2 years ago. She doesn't finish the sentence. You don't ask her to. Annie works the box room, you say. Yes. A pause. The strike they're talking about, Mrs. Baines says carefully. Miss Besant. Annie mentioned it. If it came to that, if they were striking for different conditions, she'd lose wages, you say. She might get better conditions. Conditions don't pay the rent. Mrs. Baines nods. Her pastry is rolled out now, thin and even. She puts the rolling pin down. No, she says, they don't. You finish your tea, you say goodbye, you pick up your basket. On the way out through the hall you pass the coat stand, the elephant foot umbrella stand. You walk past it the same way you always do, slightly around without touching. But this morning you stop. You look at it. An elephant foot. From India, presumably. The elephant was killed, its foot removed, turned into a stand for umbrellas belonging to a solicitor's family in Bloomsbury. The elephant has been a coat stand for probably 30 years. Nobody in this family thinks about the elephant. You look at it for about 10 seconds. Then you go through the door. The Sunday comes, the weather holds. You and Annie walk to Victoria Park in the morning. It takes 40 minutes, out through Brady Street, along Whitechapel Road, north through Bethnal Green, and then through the gates of the park, which open to you like an exhale. Victoria Park is the East End's lung. 212 acres of grass and trees and paths and a lake, and, on Sundays especially, half of East London walking through it in their Sunday clothes, children running ahead, old men on the benches, couples walking slowly in the thin November sun. The sun is actually out today. Pale and low, winter sun but real. Actual light casting actual shadows, turning the wet grass silver and the remaining leaves on the trees to gold and red in a way that the streets never quite manage. Annie walks beside you. She's walking better today. The medicine has helped with the cough, or the rest has. She slept 11 hours Thursday night and 10 on Friday and 9 last night, and the colour in her face is something closer to normal than it's been for weeks. You walk and don't speak for a while, which is the good kind of silence. The park's silence, full of birds and footsteps and children and the distant sound of someone's dog, but quiet at its base, without the commerce and pressure of the streets. Annie tilts her face up toward the pale sun. You watch her, 19 years old, thin, strong, with her father's colouring and a competence about her that you've watched grow since she was 6, since you put her in charge of her younger brother on market days, and she simply did it, without complaint, with a thoroughness that impressed you then and impresses you now. She's the best of both of you, and she doesn't know it yet, and you're not entirely sure how to tell her in a way she'll believe. I'm thinking about the strike, she says, still looking at the sky. I know. If the conditions change, if they stop using the white phosphorus, then the conditions change. But the wages, will you walk out? She thinks about it, properly thinks the way she always has. A real pause, a visible interior work. If the other girls do, she says finally, I don't want to be the one who doesn't. She looks at you. Is that wrong? I think it's wrong. You're worried about the money. I'm always worried about the money. That's my job. You look back at the pale sun. Your job is to think about what's right. Annie is quiet. Miss Besant says the conditions. Miss Besant is probably correct about the conditions. But you don't trust her. I don't distrust her. I've just been alive longer. Annie makes the not quite laugh sound. You're 40, she says, not 100. Some mornings, you say, it's difficult to tell the difference. She laughs properly this time. A real laugh, not the careful one she keeps for hard conversations. It sounds like the park sounds. It sounds like the November sun feels. You walk to the lake. You stand at the edge of it for a while, watching the ducks navigate the grey water with tremendous self-assurance, the way ducks always appear to have a plan they're not sharing. A small child near you throws a piece of bread at the ducks. The ducks descend on it with practised ruthlessness. Annie watches this and smiles. You watch Annie. This is the elevated view. Not a hill, not a grand building with a dome you can see from miles away. Just a lake in a park in November, and your daughter's face in the light, which is enough, which is more than enough, which is, right now, in this particular moment, everything. Evening comes, as it always does, and you're in the chair by the fire. This is the time of day that belongs to no one else, the work is done. Annie is asleep. She went early, tired from the walking, from the medicine, from the general effort of being 19 and slightly ill and carrying more worry than a 19-year-old should be carrying. The fire has burned down to a steady glow. You sit, your hands in your lap, the familiar territory of them. The room is warm and quiet. The sounds of the court come through the window. Not much, at 10 at night. Just the occasional voice, a door, the cat that lives on the ground floor howling about something in its comprehensive and expressive way. Distant down Whitechapel Road, the sound of carts, which never entirely stops. You're 40 years old. You've been 40 for 3 months. There was no celebration. There was no specific marker. One day you were 39 and working, and the next day you were 40 and working, and the difference between these states was theoretical at best and irrelevant at worst. But tonight, sitting with the fire and the quiet, you find yourself taking stock. Your body, catalogued. The hip, the wrist, the back, the hands, the knee that's been unreliable since the fall last February. The tooth that's missing, and the one next to it that is being diplomatic about its own intentions. The tiredness, which is not the tiredness of one day or 1 week, but the accumulated tiredness of years, a different quality from ordinary tired, more permanent, like a coat you've been wearing so long you've forgotten what it felt like not to have it on. Your children, Annie, 19, William, your son, is 16, and working as a clerk's errand boy in a solicitor's office in the city, a position that Thomas would have been proud of, that you are proud of, that costs you £1 a week for his lodging, which he contributes to from his wages, and you supplement quietly without discussing it. He comes on Sundays sometimes. He looks more like Thomas every time. Your situation, 2 rooms, a steady if exhausting work, a careful arithmetic that keeps the numbers approximately aligned. Your prospects, the same largely for the foreseeable future. Possibly better if Annie's conditions improve, possibly worse if they don't. The pawnbroker has Thomas's watch. The dispensary has Annie's lungs, in a manner of speaking. Is this what you hoped for when you were young? You think about this sometimes, not with bitterness. Bitterness is another luxury you can't quite afford, though you've tried it occasionally and found it did nothing useful for you, but with a kind of honesty. When you were 17, 18 and 19 and married and full of the ordinary hope of beginnings, you didn't think in terms of what you hoped for because the future was a given rather than a question. Thomas would work, you would work, there would be children and a house, and a degree of forward motion. There was forward motion. There was a period, in the first decade, when things moved the right direction. Thomas's wages were steady. The children were born and most of them survived. The rooms were better than these. A whole floor of a house on Princelet Street. 3 rooms, a view that included an actual tree. A period of something that wasn't comfort but was pointed the right way. Then the cough started, and then the cough got worse, and the doctor visits cost money, and the steady wages became intermittent wages, became no wages, and you took on more work, and the tree view rooms became these rooms, and the forward motion became sideways motion, became the particular kind of motion that is staying in place while everything else moves around you. But you are still here. You are still here. 3 of your children are alive. Annie is alive and 19 and thinks about the right of women to better conditions and tilts her face toward November sun in parks and laughs like water. William is 16 and handling ledgers in a city office and coming in from the cold on Sundays with his father's hands and his own separate opinions. The third child, Joseph, is 14 and still at school for another year on a scholarship that he won by being brilliant at mathematics in a way that baffles and delights you. A scholarship that costs you nothing and gives him everything. 3 children, alive and present and in the world. This matters. This is, in the real accounting, the thing on the credit side of the ledger that no number can properly contain. You sit with the fire, your back eases gradually, your hip settles, the hands in your lap, the landscape of them, familiar and red and split and yours. A week after Victoria Park, they walk out. Not just Annie's factory. 3 match factories in the East End, women and girls pouring out through the factory gates and down the streets and into the newspaper offices and the meeting halls where Miss Besant has arranged for them to speak. The match girl strike, they'll call it that later, in the history books that will be written about this period by people who weren't there and don't know what the streets smelled like on the Tuesday morning when it happened. Annie is one of them. She comes home that evening with colour in her face that has nothing to do with the medicine. We walked out at noon, she says. She's still slightly breathless, or maybe that's just the energy of the day, you can't tell yet. About 200 of us. We walked to the Bow Road meeting hall and Miss Besant was there and we all stood up and... She stops. You should have seen it, Mum, all of us. You look at her. And the wages, you say, won't know for a while. Right, but the conditions... She's looking at you with those Thomas dark eyes, full of a certainty that is absolutely his, the particular certainty of someone who has decided which side of a line they're standing on. The conditions have to change. The phosphorus has to stop. Yes, you say, you agree. I've always agreed about the phosphorus. She looks at you more carefully. Are you angry? You think about this. I'm not angry, you say. I'm afraid. About the wages. About how long a strike takes. You look at her, and I'm proud of you. Both those things are true at the same time. Annie's mouth goes sideways, then straight. We'll manage the wages, she says. You always manage the wages. I always manage the wages, you agree? She hugs you. It's brief and tight and smells of factory and fresh cold air and the camphor from the medicine she's been taking, and you hold her for the few seconds she allows before she steps back and becomes businesslike again, getting her coat off, asking about dinner. You manage the wages. You always manage the wages. November becomes December. The strike continues. It will last 3 weeks in all, and it will win. That's the thing about this particular moment in this particular place. The thing that will be in those history books later. It will win. The companies will settle. Better wages, better conditions, the right to organise. The phosphorus ban will take another decade because the companies will fight it, because the companies always fight the thing that costs them money. But the strike will be the beginning of the end of Fossey Jaw at the Bow Lane factory. But you don't know this yet. In December you know only that the wages have stopped, and the medicine costs 2p a week, and the rent is the rent. You take on more work. There is always more work if you're willing. The lodging house on Commercial Street wants someone Monday and Thursday evenings. A woman in Bethnal Green needs her laundry done, her own hands being too arthritic for it. 3 shillings a week. A baker on Hanbury Street needs the ovens cleaned every Saturday morning before 6. 6p. You add it all to the week. The body objects, not dramatically, not all at once. But the accumulation of hours and cold and repetition becomes visible in small ways. The hip is worse by December, enough that you've taken to stopping on the way to Bloomsbury at the top of the steps near Spitalfields Market. Not sitting down, just stopping, hand on the railing for 30 seconds. The wrist that has been swollen all year swells differently in December, a new and specific complaint, and the pharmacist, Mr. Davies, gives you a bandage wrap and instructions you follow when you remember to. The Caldwell house, the Friday before Christmas. You're doing the upstairs rooms, the bedroom corridor, the linen closet that needs sorting before the family's Christmas guests arrive. Mrs. Caldwell has left instructions with Mrs. Baines. The guest room needs fresh linens, the dressing room needs the shelves wiped, the brass on the bedroom fireplace needs cleaning. You're on your knees in the guest room polishing the fireplace brass when the door opens. Mrs. Caldwell. She's perhaps 35, always presented in the kind of careful morning dress that requires several people to help put on and maintain. She's holding a paper in one hand. She doesn't usually come into a room you're working in. This is the norm. You're invisible, or you're supposed to be, and most employers help maintain the illusion by simply not being present when you are. Mrs. Caldwell isn't cruel about it. She just doesn't think about it. Today, for whatever reason, she's come into the guest room while you're in it. She stops. She looks at you. There's a pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3, in which both of you are uncertain about the protocol. You're on your knees with a polishing cloth. She's holding a paper. You're both in the same room. You wait. Mrs. Pierce, she says. Mrs. Caldwell. You don't stand. Standing and kneeling again would cost you 3 seconds of hip protest, and she'll be gone before that's worth the expense. I wondered. She glances at the paper. We're having some extra people for Christmas dinner, and I thought if you were available on Christmas Eve. I'm available, you say. The kitchen will need extra help. I can come at 6. I'll tell Mrs. Baines. She pauses. Thank you. She starts to go. Then she stops again. She looks at you. Properly this time, the way Edith did in the kitchen 2 years ago. The same slightly startled look. The look of someone briefly remembering that you exist as a person rather than as a function. I heard your daughter was involved in the strike, she says carefully. She was, you say. And is she well? You look up at her from your position on the floor. This woman who is 15 years younger than you, and 15 years into a different kind of life, who is asking a genuine question in a tone that has something genuinely caring in it, if you listen for it past the awkwardness. She's getting better, you say. I'm glad. A pause. It was a brave thing, the strike. Yes, you say. It was. Mrs. Caldwell nods. She goes. You turn back to the brass. Your hands work steadily. The room smells of polish and coal and the particular clean smell of wool carpets that have been brushed. Brave. She said, brave. You polish the brass. On Christmas Eve you walk home from the Caldwell house at 10 in the evening. This is later than you usually walk, and the streets are different at 10 on Christmas Eve from how they are at any other time. The gin shops are doing their Christmas trade. A roaring business, all the lights on, voices spilling into the street. A group of men has gathered outside the public house on the corner of Commercial Street, singing something that has started as a carol and evolved, through the medium of an hour of strong ale, into something more creative. The gas lamps on Whitechapel Road have been dressed with something. Holly, branches, and a few shop windows have paper decorations pressed to the glass. Greenery and red ribbons in the window of the chemist. A small artificial tree, visible through the steamed glass of a coffee house. It is, in its way, beautiful. The East End being beautiful is not a contradiction, though it sounds like one. The East End contains, on an ordinary day, poverty and violence and illness and despair, in concentrations that would horrify anyone who encounters it from outside. But it also contains community that has been tested by those things and survived. Colour and noise and the particular warmth of people who have nothing and have decided to make something from that nothing. A woman singing in a doorway somewhere ahead of you, a voice carrying clearly through the cold air, not quite a carol, but something with the same quality of insistence. You walk. Your hip is bad tonight. It's been a 10-hour day. But there's something else in it too, a lightness, something physical that is different from the ordinary end of day. Mrs. Baines pressed an extra £0.50 into your hand before you left. Christmas wages, she called it, and you didn't argue. Mrs. Caldwell sent out a parcel with cold meat from the dinner and a piece of Christmas cake wrapped in paper, with a note that said for your family in a handwriting you don't recognise, probably written by the kitchen maid. The parcel is in your basket. Annie is at home. The strike is over. Ended yesterday. Settlement signed. She goes back to the factory after Christmas, to better wages and a better understanding of what she's willing to tolerate and what she isn't. The cough is better. The dispensary medicine is working, or the rest is working, or both. The jaw she checks every morning in the small piece of mirror she found at the market, pressing her fingers gently along the line of it, and every morning it is unchanged and unswollen, and every morning this is the first thing you notice when she comes into the outer room. Normal, fine, unchanged. William is coming for Christmas Day, taking half day from his lodgings in Finsbury. Joseph has an afternoon off from school. 3 children, alive, coming together in 2 rooms with cold meat and Christmas cake from a solicitor's house in Bloomsbury. This is what you've managed. This is what your body, with all its cracks and complaints and carefully maintained arguments, has managed to hold together. You turn into Brady Street, the court, the wooden door in its arch, the familiar lift and pull, the cobbles black and wet, up the stairs, the outer room, your room. The fire is banked and warm. Annie has kept it going while you worked. The room smells of coal and the particular lived-in warmth of your belongings, your life, the accumulated smell of everything. Annie is asleep behind the curtain. You stand in the middle of the room with your basket and your cold cheeks and your aching hip and your £0.50 and your parcel of cold meat, and for a moment you simply stand. The room is small, the room is warm. Your daughter is breathing steadily and without the night gag that frightened you in October. Breathing with the easy regularity of a person who is right now, in this moment. All right. That's enough. That's a great deal. Set the basket down. Hang the outer shawl, the heavier one, the dark blue that's almost black, on its nail by the door. Take off the boots. Begin with the bows, as always, then each cross, the left first and then the right. The boots go beside the chair. You flex your feet against the floor. The cold floor, which by now is slightly less cold than it was this morning, slightly warmed by the fire, enough that you can feel the difference. Wash your hands and face. The cold water in the basin, the grey soap, the careful washing of the cracked knuckles, the split at the base of the right index finger that is, you check, mostly healed today. A thin line of pink skin, new, the colour of something beginning rather than ending. You dry your hands on the cloth. You look at them, red and rough and capable, and yours. Sit on the edge of the pallet, the straw pallet that you have been sleeping on for 6 years, which has become, through sheer familiarity, your own territory in the most fundamental sense. The blanket is heavy wool, slightly moth-eaten at one corner, more than adequate. You reach for the small jar on the shelf, lard, white and solid at room temperature. You open the jar and take a small amount on your fingertips and begin to work it into your hands, the knuckles first, the cracks between the fingers, the roughened palms, the wrists where the swelling begins. The lard smells faintly of itself, of the pot it was rendered in. Nothing romantic about it, but the sensation of it, the slight warmth of friction, and the way it sits in the cracks of your skin, smoothing them marginally, giving them something. This is the last thing you do every day. This one small thing. Your hands in your lap. The fire is low, just coals now. The orange ember glow that fills the room with a particular light of almost dark. The walls go soft. The corners go soft. Outside, the court is quiet. Not silent. The city is never silent, but quiet in the specific way of a Christmas Eve at 10 at night, when the singing has moved inside and the streets have given themselves over to the cold and the dark and the occasional sound of something distant doing its thing without you. Somewhere to the west, a church bell, not St. Anne's, which you know well, whose voice is clear and definite. This is something farther away, a deeper tone, the sound of stone speaking slowly across rooftops. 1, 2, 3, 10 o'clock, you lie down. Here is what the body feels like at rest after a day like this. The back, releasing. The muscles that have been holding the architecture of you upright since 4:30 this morning are receiving permission, finally, to stop. You can feel this specifically, a wave of softening that moves upward from the base of your spine, a letting go that has the quality of something structural, not pain going away, just tension being allowed to exist without being necessary anymore. The hip, quiet. The grinding that characterizes its working hours is absent at rest, or present so quietly that sleep will cover it. You know it will be back in the morning. You know this the way you know everything about your body, empirically, accurately, without the luxury of denial. But tonight it's quiet. The hands, still. The lead has worked a little. The cracks are less insistent. The skin simply being skin rather than performing a function. Your hands are against the blanket, palms slightly cupped, the way hands naturally rest when nothing is required of them. The wrist, the swollen one, warm under the bandage wrap. Not comfortable exactly, but held. Your whole body, horizontal. There's more to this than you might think. All day, every day, the body is vertical. It is carrying itself upright against gravity, and adding to that the weight of whatever else needs carrying. Coal scuttles, buckets, baskets, the invisible weight of everything that needs to be managed and planned and counted. The horizontal is a different relationship with gravity entirely. The horizontal is a reprieve. The blanket is heavy. Heavy is good. The pressure of it is a comfort that you've never found words for but have understood physically since childhood. It's the weight of being covered, protected, contained. Let that settle. Sleep comes for you the same way it comes for everyone. Not all at once, not dramatically. It comes in layers. The first layer is the ending of conscious urgency. The list of tomorrow's tasks, which exists in your head as a kind of permanent background hum, always running, always tabulating, begins to quiet. Not gone. It won't be gone until morning, but quieter. The rent calculation recedes. The worry about Annie's jaw, which gets its daily check and is daily unchanged, recedes. The hip, the wrist, the split at the knuckle, these recede too. The second layer is the loosening of the face. Your face has been holding expressions all day. The neutral competence face for the Caldwell house. The careful, hopeful face for the dispensary visit. The ordinary woman shopping face for the market. The mother listening face for Annie. All day the face has been doing work that the face doesn't get credit for. Now it stops. The muscles across your forehead, your jaw, the area around your eyes. They let go. The face you make in sleep is nobody's business but your own. The third layer is the sound, the court, the distant city, the fire's last crackle from the grate, a shift of coals settling into ash. Annie's breathing from behind the curtain, steady, slow, the night sound of a person who is, right now, all right. These sounds become not sounds you're listening to, but sounds that are simply part of the texture of the dark. They fold into the dark. Your breathing slows. London, 1887, is a city of 3.5 million people. 3.5 million people, breathing in and out, most of them asleep right now, their breath warming the rooms they're sleeping in by the tiniest imperceptible amounts, collectively warming the night above the city by something that would probably be measurable if anyone thought to measure it. All of them carrying their days. The Caldwell children asleep in their well-heated rooms, dreaming of Christmas, tomorrow's stockings and church, and the particular excitement of children who've been given, by their circumstances, the luxury of full attention to the pleasure of the season. Mrs. Baines asleep in her room above the kitchen, her strong cook's hands at rest, her recipes for tomorrow already planned and organised in the particular mental filing system of a woman who has been producing dinners for 20 years. Mr. Davies, the pharmacist, asleep above his shop, the medicines on the shelves below him in their brown bottles and labelled packets, waiting for tomorrow. The men and women on the factory floor at Bow Lane who are not working tonight, who have whatever hours this night gives them, and you, Margaret Ellen Pierce née Hackett, 40 years old in November, charwoman, widow, mother, asleep, finally, in your room in the court off Brady Street, your body at rest, your hands at rest, the year almost done, the work never done, but tonight, this hour, at rest. Centuries will pass, this court, Brady Street, the court off it, the wooden door in the arch, will be demolished in the 1890s, again in the 1930s, rebuilt and demolished and rebuilt until nothing from 1887 remains standing at any address within a mile of where you sleep. The match factories will close. The white phosphorus will be banned in 1908, 21 years from now. The girls who walked out with Annie in December will be remembered as the people who started something. The first modern strike action in Britain, some will say. Others will correct this. Others will argue. The history is always argued. The East End will change. Will be bombed in the Second War, which you won't live to see. Will be rebuilt in concrete. Will change again. Will be written about and studied and gentrified in ways that the word gentrified can't fully contain. But the Thames will still be there. Spitalfields Market will still be there, different, changed, expensive now. And people will still be waking up before dawn in November and drinking cold water and putting on their boots and calculating what the week's money will cover. The calculation doesn't change. The body's conversation with its work doesn't change. What hands do, what cold does, what the specific weight of a coal scuttle carried over a decade does to a wrist. This doesn't change with the buildings or the century. Some things don't change. The thing that gets up before light and does the work that needs doing, and saves the slightly better cup for the person it loves, and listens to breathing in the dark with the focus of everything it has, that doesn't change. Let the city do what it does. Let the church bell mark the quarter hours through the long December night. Let the cats conduct their business in the courts. Let the distant traffic move. Let the fire cool. You've earned this. The bread is on the shelf for morning. The money is in the inner pocket of the dress hanging on the chair. The shawl is on its nail. Tomorrow is Christmas Day. Tomorrow William comes, and Joseph. And there will be cold meat from the Caldwell house, and cake, and the particular warmth of the fire, with all three of them in the room at once, which will make it crowded and loud and completely full. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this, the blanket, the dark, the sound of Annie breathing slow and steady through the curtain, the body horizontal, the hands still, the work for tonight finished. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes everyone who has spent themselves fully and well, and without reservation on the hours they were given. Let the sounds quiet. Let the thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've done enough. Rest now. Rest. Good night.